let me know. Give me a sign, like, go up, up, up. Can't hear you. Okay. We ready?
Yeah, we're good.
Awesome. All right, so what's wrong with my plant? The fun stuff tonight. So mostly we're going to focus tonight on vegetables and our plant diagnostic lab and a few more common diseases. If you do need to drop off a sample, a plant or insect, you can bring it to our office. It's 165 East Main Street, and there is a form to fill out. I'll talk about it more in a minute, but you can submit pictures. So sometimes, you know, if you send a picture, you can kind of skip that piece. And you know what? I just started and I did not talk about garden in a box. I just jumped right in. I am so sorry.
It's okay.
Oh, come on now. I apologize. I just was all about me there for a minute.
So Garden in a Box is a collaborative project between the University of Maine, Piscataquis County Extension Office, and Piscataquis Regional Food Center. It's designed to be a lot like a community garden, but at separate people's houses. It's a limited program, so this series is an effort to spread the expertise we have through the Extension Office to a wider audience. The next program is Win to Harvest, Wednesday, June 22nd, right here at Thompson Free Library. If you want to see recordings of these programs, they're available at prfoodcenter.org, and this one will be put up probably later in the week. If you would like any swag, we have calendars, brochures, and we're about to start a seasonal program called Farm Share for homebound seniors. So if you have a loved one who is a homebound senior, please feel free to grab some information for them. It's a produce delivery program that helps people who are unable to leave their homes all over Piscataquis County have access to fresh, locally grown vegetables. And here is Lori Bowen.
Yeah. Well, sorry about that, but you never know with me, I guess. But thank you. And I love this program, From Local Farm to Your Home, Farm Share for Homebound. I love it. So back to the Cooperative Extension. We're right over here, 165 East Main Street. And also, if you need to drop off a soil sample as well, you can bring it by there. If you have a question, stop on by. That's what we're there for. So I always talk about all the services that Extension offers. And tonight, out of all of these, you know, the agriculture, the business, the food and health, garden and yard, 4-H, and natural resources, tonight we're going to focus on insects, pests, plant diseases, and pesticide safety. We're going to talk very, very minimally about pesticide safety because honestly that could be its own program. It could be its own 6-week program, to be honest with you. So, and Justice for All. I always talk about this in my program. I do have surveys that I would ask you all to fill out. They're very short. It's to make sure that I am supplying programs to everyone equally. And if you have a complaint about that, you can contact the Department of Agriculture directly, or you can talk to me, and we will go ahead and follow that procedure to file your complaint. But also, more importantly, is if you need an accommodation of any kind to attend one of my programs, just let me know and we will figure something out. Again, if you're joining us on Facebook Live, actually I think I forgot to give you the link this time.
It's in there. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah, so it works.
Awesome. Again, these demographic surveys, they help me make sure that I'm reaching all audiences. And again, they're super short. So I'd ask all of you to fill one of those out before you go. So I found this. It's not a quote this time, but it's still super funny to me. And this is by, want to get it right, the Pineco Company. And it's just a super thing. And sometimes I think I feel like this too. I think my plants are telling me, yes, I've come here to die, and that's what's gonna happen. And I just realized, let's see, there we go. But I thought it was funny. And I thought this one was funny as well, because honestly I could find no humorous quotes in regards to plants dying, plant disease, or insects. There was no humor to be found. But knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. I agree completely with this, for sure. So what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to talk about some symptoms of plant diseases. I'm going to emphasize journaling your garden happenings. We'll talk about some preventive strategies and causes of what could be wrong with your plant. And the reason I say could is because there's lots of factors. There's not always just one straight answer on what's going on with your plant. Resources, if you do happen to have a disease going on in your garden, and I'll talk a lot about the plant diagnostic lab and how to submit those samples, and also plant diagnostic help from us, you know, determine whether it's disease or insect or both. Also, how much can you diagnose on your own? Sometimes we want an answer right away. We have lots of resources to help you narrow that down on your own. So what happens is, when we have disease, is basically it's a triangle. You have to have a host plant, you have to have a pathogen, and then you have to have the right environment. So when all those three things come together, you get plant disease. But if you take just one of those things away, you can either stop the disease or at least control it. And that's very helpful. That's what we want to do, is at least control it at the very least. Some of the symptoms of plant disease that we watch for is chlorosis, and that's just a fancy way of saying that we get yellowing of the leaves. Maybe it's in spots, dots, or splotches. It can be the whole leaf. We're not sure. You know, it depends on what type of disease. And I'm not being funny when I say dead plant parts. You know how sometimes you'll have a plant that looks really healthy, but you've got like one branch that's just like hanging, and it's just not alive anymore. It doesn't necessarily affect the whole plant, and we'll talk about that too. Some plants have this, it's a water-soaked appearance. It's kind of, they almost look like, you know, they've been doused in water. When you know that they haven't been. They might be in very dry soil. Leaf drop, I think we've all experienced that. And plant wilt. Sometimes, again, a plant will be wilting, and it's not because, you know, it's in hot sun or anything like that. It's not because it needs to be watered, but it still looks like it's wilting. And well, we'll go into detail on that too. And slow plant growth. You're just waiting forever for that plant to take off, and it just does not. And then again, some rotten plant parts, you know, like the plant doesn't necessarily look like it's dead or in trouble, but there are certain areas that it's like, it's just literally rotting. So we do have some preventative strategies. I feel like the best or the good offense is the best defense. A good offense is the best defense. There, I got it out right. So there are things we can do before we even start the process of gardening to help us get a leg up. And so we want to choose disease-resistant plants, and also choose plants that are recommended for your area. So a lot of times you can get recommendations on our website, but also when you're looking over your plant catalogs and whatnot, it'll say, you know, information like tested in the Northeast, hardy to zone 5. You know, it'll give you a little bit of background on it. The other thing is good record keeping. You want a journal, and I'm going to explain that because sometimes it's like, you know, you have so much going on in the garden already. The last thing you have time for is to write down what you planted, when you saw the disease and like that. But a good example of how that can benefit you in the following year is like if you're trying to rotate your crops, you know, you want to move them each year to prevent disease. And you can't remember where you put it. If you keep a journal, you'll be like, oh yes, I've done pumpkins there for 5 years in a row. I need to move them. Another strategy is scouting your plants and your garden regularly. And I say plants and garden because you want to keep an eye out too in the garden. You know, do I have an area that every time it rains it's underwater for 4 or 5 days? Or, you know, you go out on a Sunday and everything looks great, and then you go out the following Sunday and there's like half of your plants are covered in bugs or has some kind of disease going on. And also evaluate your garden site. You know, think about the light that it's going to get, the type of soil that you have, again, the standing water, or maybe no water. Maybe the water just runs right off immediately. And also another thing to remember is water the plant, not the leaves. So we want to make sure that we have another guest. It's a very pretty black cat that's coming to join us. So, and so when we water, we don't want to water the foliage. We want to water on the base of the plant and make sure we're getting the roots and not the leaves. Sometimes the leaves, if we get them wet continuously, they don't have a time to dry, then they'll spread disease as well. So cultural practices. I wish everybody could see this cat right now. He's really enjoying himself here.
Actually, we just posted about him today.
Oh.
Because he wanders over all the time and he tries to get in the door. But then he comes over for programs and just rolls around until people pet him.
Well,
But he goes to the police station too, and they give him treats in there, and then he goes like over to the courthouse, so he's like all over the neighborhood.
I'm bringing treats from now on. For the next program, we're bringing treats. So, would you like to come up and share the stage? It's a very pretty cat. Cultural practices. So, soil preparation. You know, we want to make sure that we've taken a soil test, but also that, you know, we've gotten our garden ready to go. Fertilization is important too. It's important to and not to. Make sure you need that fertilizer before you start. Plant spacing, that is super important because we want to make sure one of the ways that we can control disease is through air circulation. So if we plant too closely together and that air can't circulate, it's a perfect environment for disease to happen. Also, watering earlier in the day is super important. Give those plants a chance to dry out and avoid overwatering. Sometimes, you know, I have seen, you know, some folks that like, they get home from work, they turn on the hose and the sprinkler goes all evening until they shut it off, you know, and especially in the evening, it's not a great idea because we want to water early in the day. But that, you know, we're overwatering. We're not deciding or coming to a point where we know how much our garden needs for water. Also, clean up plant debris at the end of the growing season. Sanitation is super important. And again, choose disease-resistant varieties. And sometimes on the seed packet or in the seed catalog, they'll tell you, you know, disease-resistant too, and they'll list the diseases. That information is usually on there. And again, rotating your crops. So, for example, you know, if you've been doing, what did I use for an example? Pumpkins. If you've been doing pumpkins in the same place and it's time to rotate, you'll have it in your journal. You know, number one, where it was last year, but number two, like, were there any diseases, or did you get a bumper crop? You know, what did I do right? It's not just about negatives, it's about what I did right, too. So, control or eliminate weeds. I put eliminate on there as a joke. I mean, no, truly, it is in one of our bulletins, you know, to eliminate weeds, and I don't have that kind of success, but definitely those annual weeds, make sure you get those out of there. And you can, you know, use mulches, and that will help, you know, control your weeds as well. But also wash your garden tools, especially if you've got a disease going on. You know, we're going to wash the garden tools, and I'll talk about that. We're going to do 2 different methods. And again, avoid crowding your plants. We want them to have that nice air circulation. So yeah, one of the reasons we keep such good records is because, you know, we want to keep track of signs, maybe the symptoms, what was going on before our disease started or the insect started. Sometimes too, the dates can help you, because you'll know, like, gosh, you know, last year I planted the last week in June. As soon as they came up, they were devoured by these insects. You know, what if I, you know, planted like a week later? Would that affect, you know, yield? So it's, you know, think about those kind of things. Like, sometimes just a matter of throwing the insects off and not providing them with food can help. So there's lots of reasons that plants can do poorly, and I don't think anyone should think it's them. I think a lot of people are like, you know, I failed at my garden. It's not necessarily, you know, any fault of yours. Lots of things can go on. Things that are environmental, totally out of your control, like frost damage, herbicide drift. Sometimes, you know, we don't know, and, you know, the drift, the wind takes an herbicide, and then it's in your plants, and that's nothing you can do much about. And sometimes it's a nutrient deficiency in the soil. So, of course, different plants need different nutrients, and that's why those soil tests come in so handy. But also, they might be doing poorly because of disease or the incorrect planting time. Now, I just mentioned, you know, trying to throw them off by changing your planting time. But I'm talking within the range of when you should plant. Sometimes it's planting depth. Sometimes we plant our seeds or our seedlings too deep, not deep enough. And incorrect location. You know, say it's something that needs, you know, full sun, needs at least 6 hours of sun. And we didn't realize it, but by early July, the leaves are all out, and now it's like in shade, and it only gets a couple hours of sun. So those kind of things. Poor quality seed or seedling transplants. Inspect the seedlings that you get. You know, don't be purchasing anything that already looks like it's, you know, fighting disease or is covered with insects, things like that. Also the seed. Most seed packets, I think actually all seed packets will have a date that they were packed on them. So take a look at the date as well. In general management practices is kind of a vague term, but basically that means things like you're hoeing in between your rows with your hoe, and you're just beating up on your plants, and you're doing all kinds of physical damage to them. That would be a management practice. Or you don't water until you see all the plants falling over, you know, and that's how you water.
Yeah. I grew asparagus, and I ate them all.
that
was it.
That is a good management practice. Harvest before the beetles can get them. Yeah, that's a very good. You harvested like first thing. You took them all.
It was so good.
Oh, so that would probably go under. Let's see, which one would that go under? There is another category where over harvesting. So I'm a big fan of early detection. Even if I don't have time to do anything in the garden, I still go out and take a peek. And then that's a double-edged sword, though, because then you see that and then you're like, oh, now it's dark and I can't do anything. But the sooner you know, the better chance you have to fight whatever problem is going on. So again, evaluate your site. How's it doing? Is it too wet, too dry? How's the plant material doing overall? You know, is just one or two things struggling, or is the entire garden struggling? Weather, you know, and weather's going to come back to you're too wet or too dry. You know, when we're having like a super wet summer, you know, we don't need to get out there with the hoses, things like that. You know, we can get a rain gauge and keep track of how much rain we're getting. But also, you know, is it cold? Are we having a really, really cold spring? Or are we having an unseasonably hot spring? You know, we need to keep track of those things, and those are always good things to write in your journal as well. So we also want to take a look at, you know, the distribution of what's going on. So we'll want to look at just on the plant, and like I said, or is it the whole garden that's suffering? Is it just, you know, one type of plant? Is it just cucurbits that are struggling, or is it, you know, something else? And is that symptom, you know, that you're seeing, like let's say it's yellowing leaves, is it spreading, is it increasing, or is it just kind of staying the same? You know, is it just on that one plant? So did that one plant suffer this injury, or, and that will help you identify too what's going on. What type of plants are you seeing them on, for instance, the cucurbits? Or when did you first notice the symptoms? Because there are lots of resources too that will like let you know, like, you know, like this is the time of year perfect for powdery mildew, you know, keep a watch out for that, those sorts of things. You know, they'll even, there's lots of gardening websites that will send you like little notices. There's one too that'll like send you frost warnings and things like that in your area. So, you know, use those tools too. So, septoria leaf spot. Anybody ever dealt with this before? My wish is that you do not. It's really not that horrible, but this is one of the more common ones. So there's spots on the leaves. It is a fungal disease. Yeah, the fungal diseases are harder. Well, they're not harder to deal with, but they can really sneak up on you. They start as really small spots, and then they get on the lower leaves where there's less airflow around, and we know how important the airflow is. And then it kind of spreads up the plant, and it can overwinter. That's the bugger about this, is it can overwinter in the plant debris. That's why we want to clean everything up. And it can also overwinter on the stakes if you're staking like your tomatoes. So we're going to talk about, you know, disinfecting too. But that is one that is pretty common. We get lots of questions on it because people mistake it for, they think it's late blight or they think it's early blight. And so they're both spots. All three of them are spots, pardon. But this one starts out this way, and it is pretty easy to manage though, because just good airflow, keeping your leaves dry, and cleaning up in the fall, good sanitation, and you can control this. So this is why they're mistaken for each other quite often. So over on this side we have the septoria, and then on the top there is the late blight, and then early blight. Now, we do get septoria and early blight here in Maine. You know, that's going to happen every year. You know, to what degree, you know, is going to be, you know, how well you're able to control it. But late blight gets blown in. You know, that comes in on storms. So it's not a guarantee that we'll get late blight. So that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. Oh yeah, and it can also be brought in on diseased plants. Like if they bring in some tomato plants that already have it, then we'll get it.
How do you get rid of that?
The late blight
Or the early?
the early blight. The early blight is going to be the same control, and the late blight is very late. and I did bring some handouts on it. The problem is it's in cool, moist weather, and so it, you know, and it's late light for a reason. You know, it's it's going on late, right when your tomatoes are really at their peak and whatnot. Do not compost the leaves. You don't want to take a chance on that carrying over. But you do need to dispose of the leaves. And unfortunately, when you get the late blight, it's kind of too late. So you kind of have to just dispose of it because it can spread. You know, it can continue to spread. Cold damage. So in cold damage, this is going to be environmental, you know, versus disease. Disease, you don't have as much control over, you know, initially. But things like cold damage, you know, when you get that frost warning on the news or whatever, you can go out and protect your seedlings and whatnot. But you can see, seems like everything is spots. But you can see kind of, everything kind of starts out like a spot. But what it is like for instance, it doesn't show very nicely on here, but the leaves can get like a purplish tint, and that's how you can identify it as cold damage. Now, if you get more of a white, that also can be, depending on the plant, that can be cold damage too, but more than likely it's going to be due to too much sun. So the plants haven't been hardened off, they're out there in that hot, full sun, and, you know, they get a sunburn. You know, basically, I guess I would call it a sunburn. But I didn't have a good picture of sun damage. But it is important to harden off your plants before you put them out, because we want to make sure that they're used to the wind, the sun, the cold, all those things. And if you think about wind is really one of the factors that gets ignored a lot. We're concerned about planting before, you know, last frost, or planting after last frost, but we don't think about the wind and the sun because we think they're good. So, powdery mildew. It's a fungal disease, and I don't have my powdery mildew slide. Aw, it was a good one too. Well, maybe it'll come
similar.
Well, I'll just talk about powdery mildew. So it's on cucurbits. It's going to be, you know, on all of them. It's another one of those ones that well, it looks like powdered sugar. It looks like somebody came along and sprinkled powdered sugar on your leaves, okay? And you can even brush it off. It'll brush off. But and there's also one that can get on things like 9-bark and lilacs, and it looks more gray. It's different though. So if you do have it on your ornamentals, don't worry, it's not going to transfer to your vegetables. They're different varieties. But it's a different species rather. I'm trying to find that picture because it was an awesome picture. But also it affects like pumpkins and squash, things like that. Your produce won't store that long, and that's another bad result of it. So if you have had powdery mildew, you might want to find an alternative to store it. So. This is an example of magnesium deficiency, and it's that bright yellow on the leaves that you can see. So I wanted to talk about ornamentals for just a second, and this is one of my favorite websites. I don't think I can go to it right now, but if you'd like the link, I can supply it for you. But the reason I like the University of Minnesota's webpage too is because, number one, they have a lot of ornamental resources and diseases that can affect them. And they also have great pictures of the disease itself, and particular hostas, because hostas are tricky to diagnose, I think. because the diseases and things are similar until you get to know them. But I also wanted to point out just how many resources are out there. You know, there are a lot that some will focus on your ornamentals, some will focus on vegetables, and you know, others will focus on your fruit trees, for example. But this picture is actually of tobacco rattle virus. Now, that's a tricky one to diagnose, you know, so this is one resource that you should all take advantage of as well. So I wanted to talk about insects and pests too. So just like with disease-resistant varieties, we want to select pest-resistant varieties as much as we can. And, you know, we have a lot of local companies that, you know, are here in Maine. So we know that they've been tested here in Maine. And they provide a lot of information on the seed packets and on their web pages. And also, Cooperative Extension, we also have recommendations on our web pages of different varieties of vegetables, for instance. What am I doing on time? I feel like I'm speeding through. Oh, I'm just speeding through, aren't I? I might end on time tonight. So if it is, you know, a seedling, you know, you're going to transplant, again, not only look for signs of disease, but also look for signs of insects as well. And again, water the soil and not the roots. So whether it's insect or disease, the rules are kind of still the same when you're trying to prevent it. And again, don't water on the leaves. We don't want to water the roots. Now, one key thing is to inspect the plants during different times of the day and evening. So when I said even when I don't have time to do much, I still want to go out, because at night in the evening is when you're going to see the slugs. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of creatures out there that are showing up to do their damage. And you might even see, you know, catch a rabbit or something out there, but at least you'll know what's going on. Also, when you're looking for insects, make sure you turn the leaf over. You're going to, you know, see a lot of signs on the underside. You might see the eggs. And also, insects are camouflaged so well. For example, tomato hornworm. I have looked right at a plant before and gone, there's not one there, and stare at it long enough and all of a sudden, oh, it's right there. I mean, some insects are most insects are very camouflaged. So you have to look really carefully. Assess the amount or the percentage of the damage you're seeing. And the reason I say that is because I know this isn't going to sound quite right, but sometimes when you see just a little bit of damage, it might be that you have beneficials at work in your garden and they're taking care of things. So when you see one leaf that has one hole in it, you know, don't think, oh, I've got bugs, I've got to spray, I've got to, you know, I've got to pull up the plant, or whatever your solution may be. Take a look at, is it 10% of the whole row of green beans? Is it 1%? Or is it 50%? Because that's going to also help if you have to send it for diagnosis. You know, when they can see just how much is affected in a whole row or a patch of pumpkins or something like that, then that also helps them know, you know, that's another clue for them. Because we're all playing detectives and, you know, we're looking for clues. And the amount of damage is also going to help you figure out what to do about it. For instance, if you had a crabapple and you were like concerned about it because you saw a disease on it or insects, but it's really only maybe 5% of the tree, that's going to change the recommendation. You know, that's not going to affect the overall health necessarily of the crabapple in some instances. So try to determine, is it 50%, is it 100%, you know, what's going on. So I also wanted to talk about submitting insect specimens, because I haven't talked about that a whole lot. So you can, if you happen to be in Orono, you can drop them off. They do have a drop-off. You do need to fill out one of the forms that I brought copies of. Also, as well with them, you can send a picture. Sometimes they can identify from a picture, but a lot of times they're going to need that specimen. So one thing to really keep in mind, though, is they can't accept things like if you took the vacuum and, you know, vacuumed a bunch out of your windowsill or something, you can't submit, you know, the vacuum contents like that. So if it's, you know, an insect and you only have heart, you know, identification is going to be hard. With that being said, though, if it's ticks or lice, and, you know, the major portion of the body is there, you can submit that. If the insect has collected some body fluids, they can't accept that, and that's due to health reasons, for sure. Let's see. And they can work with physicians if need be, but that does have to come from the physician. So when it comes to submitting, oh, I think I forgot one more point. Oh, nope, hit it all. No floor sweepings either. You know, you can't just sweep them all up. Just some bugs for you to consider. So, how to submit an insect specimen for identification. And I'm going to read this because I do not want to instruct you incorrectly. And by the way, that's an eastern box elder. So, excluding moss and butterfly, you should place them in a leak-proof container with just enough alcohol to preserve the specimen. Okay. Rubbing alcohol, you know, just regular rubbing alcohol like you get at the pharmacy. So butterflies and moths, those you pack in tissue because those, you know, the wings are so fragile. And you can mail them, or you can drop off the specimens. Now you can drop off up there on Godfrey Boulevard in Orono, right off I-95, or you can also drop them by the offices and we'll get them up there for you. Powdery mildew management. I don't know why I'm back at powdery mildew management, but let's talk about it. Maybe I'll find the picture. The picture would be awesome. So again, select varieties with resistance or tolerance. Again, check your seed catalogs, then packets. The key thing here is plant spacing, and that's for air circulation. And of course, we want healthy plants with the proper nutrients. You know, the healthier the plant, the more resistant to disease it will be. And insects are going to be attracted to a plant that's suffering from disease. So it's a, you know, it's a circular kind of thing. We have to make sure that it's a healthy plant to guard against disease, and then if we do that, then it'll also help guard against the insects. Powdery mildew you can control if you choose to do a pesticide, a sulfur product, but make sure it's labeled for vegetables because there are different options out there. Sanitize your cutting tools, because we don't want to transfer this all through the garden if it's not already there. And so what we're going to do, again, because this is metal, we're not going to want to dip it in bleach. We're going to use alcohol, and you can spray it on and let it air dry, or you can dip the whole thing in alcohol. Damping off disease. Boy, these are really shuffled. Another thing I wanted to talk about, though, with the seedlings, if you grow your own seedlings at home, a disease called damping off, excuse me, and that happens when the seedling just right at soil level just dies. It just falls off, dies. And it's because of a soil pathogen. Excuse me. Yeah, they flop right over at the soil line, And a lot of this is from overwatering. We want to make sure that the water can drain off, or that the soil has an option to dry. And one of the other ways you can prevent on that is growing in a warm environment, 70 to 75 degrees. You can try a heat mat, one of the heat mats, to maintain that heat if you have that option. And those will all help because when we grow in a warm area, the pathogens don't like that as much. They prefer a cool, damp. Fungal diseases prefer cool and wet conditions. Another thing is, though, if you're going to reuse your seedling trays, make sure that you clean them. And what you'll do, this is funny. This is like supposed to be before that other one. And then we're going to talk about hardening off as well. But you want to make sure that you clean your seedling trays. So what you'll do is wash the debris out of them, and then you're going to soak them for 15 minutes in a 1 part to 9 parts bleach solution to water. So 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. And then let them air dry. So clean your seedling trays so that you don't pass that pathogen on. Another thing that happens...
Would you do that only if you had a problem, or just out of habit at the end of the year?
I would do it out of habit, because you may have just dodged a bullet before, and that's why you didn't have the problem. But I think it's just a good practice to get into. But if you've not had any problems, you know, don't want to really...
I'm not, you're scaring me a little bit.
I am?
Do you have something every year that you have to fight, or is it just something?
No, I do not.
Okay.
I do not. No.
When I remember, we've had a couple things, but I'm just not sure how.
No, I'm sorry. I guess I am kind of giving you all a negative message tonight. I'm going on what we get for calls every year.
Okay.
So they're not like a majority. It's not like, some things do come in floods, but like I didn't get any calls on damping off. But I have in the past, and it is something. It's kind of a common question. So I guess these should all be put in the category of frequently asked questions, and also the most common diseases that we see. It doesn't mean that it's going to be, a situation every single year. Like it's kind of counterintuitive with the powdery mildew. You would think that they wouldn't like the dry, and that's usually when we get that, because they don't like damp leaves. So, and it all depends too on the weather we're getting. Some years the weather is just prime for some of these diseases, and other years it's a great year, and it may not affect everything in your garden too. So yeah, I'm gonna come up with something positive to say right now. I am. So hardening off. So when you start your seedlings, or you purchase seedlings, we do need to toughen them up before we put them out in the garden. So we'll start that slowly. We'll start setting them outside for maybe 2 to 3 hours a day, get them used to the extra sunlight, the wind, cooler temperature, because if you figure you've had them on a heat mat, 70 to 75, they're gonna need a little bit of a transition period. So just make sure that you do that for at least a week in advance before you put them in the ground. And they'll do really well for you. So when you have a widespread disease, you're going to look at other components, like maybe insufficient drainage, not enough water, nutrient deficiency, temperature extremes, and that's out of your control. That indicates, a soil-borne disease that's, it's got broad host ranges. That's an extreme. So again, 1 part bleach to 9 parts water when you want to clean your seedling trays. I also brought, like I said, our series on tips for growing houseplants in Maine, and in particular the controlling insects and diseases in houseplants. But the whole series is helpful, really. It's online. It's easy to access as well. Oh, here's another random picture of an aphid. Here's a fungus gnat. Spider mites. I should have a video in here somewhere. Mealybugs. And this is scale. These are houseplants, by the way. So, you know, just to be positive, this is not out in your garden necessarily. This is on our houseplants. So when your first steps, you're going to try to diagnose, see what's going on in your garden, whether it's a plant disease or an insect disease. You're going to take note of the type of damage it is. And you can see, you know, insects, if you've got holes, things like that. And then, so we have the fact sheet, and then we have a photo gallery to help you identify it. And then we also have information on submitting that specimen. But sometimes you also want to just give us a call, contact us, and find out, you know. So you can have resources for both. And I just wanted to show you how cool our webpage is, because we have, you know, the photo examples of insects, you know, and you can click on each one and you can see how to manage them. And then also same thing for plant diseases, you know, and they'll list the disease. So if you think you've identified the disease, you can go ahead and click on that. And this is another one of ours. You know, we have different categories too. Like if you're looking for, you know, a fruit pest, you know, you can go to that one and it's going to show you the fruit pests, you know, so you can get a better idea of where to look for what. Now, if you cannot figure it out and you want confirmation or you just want to know, you can send a sample to the Plant Disease Diagnostic Lab. Expect 5 to 10 business days after the sample arrives for the diagnosis, and you will get a report. Again, you can try sending photos and sending it, you know, by email. If that doesn't work, sometimes we do need the actual physical sample, but that will be communicated to you as well. If you don't find it, check your spam folder and check soon, because some of them will delete after 30 days. And so I'm seeing water running off the tent on that side, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what, are we getting ready? So we have the submission form online, and we also have, you know, the form you can download or pick one up at our office. This is what it looks like, and try to fill this out as best as you can. You know, answer questions like, you know, did it appear suddenly or gradually? And this is to the best of your ability. You know, fill it out as much as you can. Things like, you know, is it on a single plant, or is it on, you know, a group of plants? We'll ask you questions like, you know, the age of the plant. So this form is for all plant material. It's not going to be just for your vegetables. So if you've got something going on with your shrubs, something like that, we're going to want to know how old it is, things like that. And there are detailed instructions as well, how to submit each type of thing. Sometimes, you know, you need to send the whole root, because the root can tell you a lot too about what's going on. And this is, what time am I at? Sorry, yes, 6:50. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and play this video. It's only like 2 minutes, but it will explain a lot about submitting. Hi, kitty. Ooh. Maybe I'm going to try again. Well, yeah. Now that's all right. I think it's just me. Go on our webpage though. Watch this video. Whoops, sorry, kitty. before you submit, and it's going to help narrow it down for you really closely. How to submit your sample. Oh, now I've done it. Now my clicker doesn't work. Let's see. Where?
You click into it, then the clicker should work.
Okay.
Is it working now?
Well, it is on my... Oh, you know what it might be? No. I don't know what it might be. I'm back at the beginning.
Oh, jeez.
What's your question, Kitty? Oh, we're at questions. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to go back over just want to make sure, because there is lots of really pertinent information on this. If you have any questions, just let us know and we'll help you fill that out. Because for instance, if you're taking pictures that you're going to submit, focus on, we need a picture of like the whole plant, and then we need a close-up, in focus. So there's lots of tips and tricks on there as well. So submitting the plant is a little different than the insect, but one thing to remember is if you're sending it by mail, try very hard to send it like, the first of the week so that it gets to the office up there before it closes, so it doesn't sit somewhere over the week because it starts to break down. Another thing is like the plant that died, for example, when my hardening off and dampening off examples, once it's dead, there's not a lot we can do because microorganisms start breaking that down. So if you do have that happen to you with your seedlings, it doesn't really do any good to send the sample. But if you have any questions about submitting samples, if you just want confirmation of your diagnosis after you've done the research, again, contact us and we'll try to help you out with that. But there's a lot of different diseases out there that can be going on. So did I reassure you any? Am I less negative Nelly now? Have you had any of the diseases I mentioned?
A couple of years ago,
We had that hornworm.
Oh yeah, those are beastly. Yeah.
The first time I saw that, it was just awful. It was so big.
So one thing with the hornworms, I look for their frass, because so that I can find that, spot that easier than I can the hornworm. So when I'm looking for that first, because once I see that, then I know they're out there. So then I'm more determined than ever to find them and do something,
Well, first thing I noticed is like a whole bunch of my tomato plant was gone.
Oh.
What happened? All the leaves, and it was just a stick left.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal, isn't it? Yeah.
Never seen anything like that before.
Yeah. It was, yeah. Have you had any of these?
Not those. I
Oh, good.
Cucumber
Beetles. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, when you diagnose or identify what's going on, go right to the webpage, and the control measures are going to be there, and it's going to tell you just what you can do, what your options are. So it's really helpful. Does anybody have any questions?
we have a groundhog in our backyard. I put a trap up, hopefully caught him by the time we get home. But
What did you put in for bait? Did you
Put
put
in
broccoli?
And
Lettuce?
First we did watermelon.
yeah, cantaloupe worked really well before, but we didn't have any, so
Yeah.
watermelon was our option.
No takers on that one.
I've heard of melon. I've heard of melon several times. Yeah. But we had one, I don't know if there's one this year, but at Rogers Farm, and it was very, very hard to catch. And I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago. I think the pest management was Mr. Fox that I saw running across the field one night when I was leaving. Because after that, he never did go in the trap, but I didn't see him for
Yeah.
a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are hard. You
We
know.
didn't even know it was there. We had come inside after he had
We have
dug it
one
all up again.
under the shed
Oh, really?
back there,
Yeah.
He tried to get in the door last week.
Really?
He was up on the porch like last Thursday.
They're kind of books.
You can be like, you know, it's our mascot.
Yeah.
But any other questions?
Question. If you can't water in the morning, like I go to work at 5, so
Yeah,
what
hard.
do you do?
So if you go at 5, I'm hoping you get home relatively early.
Or
Yeah. So the goal is to make sure that if, you know, the water does get up on the leaves and whatnot, that, you know, it has time to dry. So for instance, you're aiming to water at the roots, not the leaves also. But you can only do what you can do, you know. So if that's the only time you can water, my recommendation is that it's better to do one deep watering each week rather than try to do it like every day.
Okay.
So if you can do that one deep watering of what they need, you know, depending on what you have gotten, you know, if you have to like designate it to a Saturday or whatever, but that would be the solution I would.
That is a good solution. But I don't work efficiently.
Yeah. So on those days off, you know, do that super deep watering to take care of their watering needs, and then you won't have to even be concerned about it, you know, until, you know, each week kind of thing.
I thought too, since you have a raised bed, I wonder if you put in a sofa hose, and then it would just do the roots. You wouldn't have to worry about your leaves. Because we talked about that one of the other seminars.
Yeah, as long as, you know, I wouldn't do it overnight because we want it, you know, we still want it to get absorbed and used by the plant. But yeah, those are great options as well, for sure.
Get the thing with the water bottle.
Yes, I tried the water bottle.
It didn't
I
work.
started seeds way too early. And
Oh.
they're starting to just die. You have a little pot I put it in, is not big enough.
Yeah.
So I got this thing where I put dirt in it. Upside down soda bottles.
Yeah.
I don't know how often. I mean, it used up all the water. So do I just keep filling it so it doesn't take all the
So when you put your hand in the dirt, is it dry or is it still wet?
Well,
Like,
we
is it
just
wet
took it
down?
out of the bag, so it's kind of dry and powdery.
Okay. Sounds like it's not getting enough.
Just did it today.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I just don't know if I should keep filling up those bottles until it just stops sucking up all the
Yeah.
water.
Now, what kind of a pot is it in? Is it in a clay
It's one
pot?
of those long, like, window pots that
Oh,
we
okay.
hang on the windows.
Oh, okay.
But it's in the porch.
Oh,
We have a closed-in porch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another option that's easier too than, you know, sticking your hand in there, and there are moisture meters that you can stick in, and it tells you whether it's dry or too wet, or, you know, that's an option as well.
Now, would you have to do it all the whole way?
If it's you would want to just put it in to make sure that, you know, the soil is moist everywhere, because like if it's just in the center and the edges are all dry, you know, that the dry part could wick all that moisture back to itself and draw it away from the plant roots. So if they're small, that's what my concern is, just that, you know, if their roots are like here and the moisture is out here, the roots aren't really, because you said they're small, right? They're just seedlings. Yeah.
Well, the squash, they got about that tall, but they were in one of those little round pods.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
the roots were coming out the bottom, and
Yep.
then they just started to die because it just didn't have enough soil.
Yeah, they need those, you know, nutrients and stuff. But, you know, plants are resilient too. I mean, you know, once you're giving them what they want, you know, they could certainly come back. I mean,
Right.
I wouldn't give up on them.
I planted them. We'll see what happens. Last year I killed everything I started.
No.
I overwatered it.
Oh,
Now I
okay.
didn't water it enough.
But now you know. See, and that, like, that could be in your journal. Last year I overwatered, and this year I know I didn't, you know, and, you know. all your experiments you'll have, you know, recorded. And another thing too about the journaling is, like, one thing I do is I take the seed packet and I staple it in there so that when I go to, I'm like, is it ready to harvest? Yeah. You know, I can look on the back and it says 60 days to harvest, and I've written on the seed packet when I planted it. And, you know, so those seed packets, like, have great information, and they're a great way to track what's going on. So, of course, sometimes, you know, accidentally they get ripped or whatever, but, I mean, I try my best to keep them in sort of one piece and keep them in, you know, a spot where I can see. And if I hated them, you know, but whatever made me buy them in the first place, at least now I know, do not buy these again. You know, it was a fail, or, you know, or I didn't care for the taste or whatever. So, but yeah. Well, please help yourself to any of the bulletins that you need. Let me know if you have any other questions, or if you want, you know, some help navigating, you know, our web pages, because there is an awful lot of information in there. But it's good information, you know, it's all research based and it's reliable. And when you're looking for information on the internet, you know, if it's an extension, or if it's like .edu, for example, things like that, you know, that's reliable information. So feel secure in, you know, using that to identify pest problems and pathogens, things like that. So thanks everybody for coming. I wish that the kitty were still here, but apparently he didn't like what I was saying.
On to other adventures.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. See you.